Okay, we are live this morning. This is the Senate Transportation Committee. It's Tuesday, the last day of February. And we have two members that are out this morning, and they're going to be with Zoom with us this morning, Senator Kitchell and Senator Perchlik. And we will, our first item of business is S77, the notch bill, which we've discussed for many, many years over and over again. We seem to not make much progress on it, other than putting a toll gate there and charging everybody to get through. So with that, Anthea, would you like to take us through the bill of this proposed legislation? See if we can find out something new and different.
Okay, so for the record, Anthea Dexter Cooper from the Office of Legislative Counsel. The bill is S77, but before going through it, Senator Chin actually asked me yesterday, for a little refresher on what was done last year. So I thought that would be a helpful entry point to the discussion. So I have a side-by-side that shows 23 VSA section 1006B pre-July 1, 2022 and post-July 1, 2022. So this is the amendment that was made in the T-bill last year. So super quick, it was just the one section that's applicable here. The first change that was made was prior to July 1, 2022, the column all the way to the left, the section heading, which is supposed to help the reader, said that it was a commercial vehicle operation prohibited, and then it went on to have a definition of commercial vehicle. Commercial was struck from the section heading last year, and then instead of having it be a defined definition for commercial vehicle, it was just a length of the vehicle. And you'll see that the subdivision 1 that's highlighted that starts with single frame motor vehicles over 40 feet in length and tractor units with 1 or more attached trailers over 45 feet in total length. And if you'll remember, you had like some diagrams that were drawn that showed the modeling that the agency had done. The other big change that was done in the bill was prior to July 1 of 2022, the language said for purposes of who would be subject to a civil penalty, either the operator of a commercial vehicle who violates the subsection or the operator's employer shall be subject to the civil penalty. And it didn't say, in what instances it was one or the other. This language that is now the law post July 1, 2022 is now the employer of an operator who is operating a vehicle in the scope of employment and violates the subsection, or the operator of a vehicle who is operating a vehicle for personal purposes and violates this subsection. So if the driver is under the control, the direction of an employer and goes through the notch, it's the employer that's subject to the civil penalty. If the operator is choosing to go that way, it's easier, wants a scenic drive, or any other reason for personal purposes and violates the subsection, then it's the operator of the vehicle, not the operator's employer. One of the things the committee talked about last year was the Agency of Transportation's recommendation to increase the civil penalties. You decided not to do that. So it stayed at $1,000 if you go through the notch and you're not supposed to, and $2,000 if you go through the notch and you're not supposed to, and you get stuck and obstruct traffic. One of the things, and I was in contact with the agency about this over the summer, is the word that I've highlighted in green, or penalties, creates some ambiguity because it's not multiple penalties. This is talking about the doubling if there's a second or subsequent conviction. That or penalties is slated to be struck in the technical corrections bill. It's also struck in S77. But that is just because there is ambiguity created as to whether or not you could be subject to a doubling of the penalties for both going through the notch when you're not supposed to and getting stuck. It's one or the other. You could get hit with penalties for not following the signs, which is why when you see the signs on the highways and it says like, don't go through the notch, you're gonna get stuck, it has a civil penalty fee that's larger than the $1,000 and the $2,000 that you see here. And the only other change is adding the subsection headings throughout for subsection A, B, and C. So that's what was done last year. Any questions before I go to S77?
No, any questions?
Okay,
All right.
so S77 is building off of the existing law. It's adding some new definitions. a definition for GPS navigation provider. That's going to be the entity that is providing GPS navigation through a GPS navigation system. So if you are using an app on your phone, then the GPS navigation system would be the app. And if you're using that on your phone, the GPS navigation provider would be the entity that made that app available to you. So I'm not going to use names and specifics, but if you think about GPS navigation providers, companies like Apple, Google, Wave, Garmin, TomTom, some of those companies make standalone devices that you could have in your vehicle, not something that is on your phone. And within the universe of providers, there are companies that provide commercial GPS. This is not specific to that. So this is saying generically GPS navigation provider. It would apply even if it was like a free app that you downloaded on your phone and just had ads as the revenue generated. Doesn't change anything to the prohibition. Doesn't change what vehicles can go through. Doesn't change those lengths. Fixes the or penalties on line 17 and then adds a new subdivision. Oh, and it doesn't change anything that you worked on last year where it's the operator if for personal purposes and it's the employer if for within scope of employment. New language, if an operator of a vehicle that violates the subsection, so goes through the notch being over length, was using a GPS navigation system that did not provide explicit notice of the prohibitions in subdivision 1, the over length prohibitions, then the GPS navigation provider of the GPS navigation system, so the company that's providing the app or the discrete device, shall be subject to a civil penalty of $2,000. Doesn't talk about how it's enforced, doesn't talk about how you get in contact with the companies, but it's putting in there that there's this civil penalty that would extend to the provider of the GPS service. And then so that the GPS companies have hopefully the information that they need, expanding the requirements of what the agency needs to do. So under current law, the agency needs to erect signs conforming to the MUTCD to indicate the closures, and it really should be prohibitions. This is sort of just a clarifying change, and that's it. The agency doesn't need to do anything beyond posting signs. So everything they're doing above and beyond that, like anything that's posted to the agency's website, that is not something that's required under the law. This would be expanding what the agency is required to do to also provide notice of the closures and prohibitions authorized under the section to GPS navigation providers. And the closure piece hasn't been touched in a while, but that's the complete closure during the winter. So if you were, and I've done this a couple times, both from a computer and from my phone, to try and get like from here to Smuggler's Notch now, and you ask GPS to track that for you, it would completely reroute you because it does know that it's closed during the winter. So presumably they're getting information on that somehow from the state or from some other entity. So that's S77. It would go into effect on July 1 of 2023.
What's the, so we are allowing 40-foot length or 45 total, we allow that?
Up to. So single frame motor vehicles over 40 feet in length and tractor units with one or more attached trailers over 45 feet in total length. Those are the ones that are prohibited.
So they're prohibited.
Yeah.
Okay, I just.
So single axle or whatever,
Yeah, okay.
or a standalone truck, 40 feet, and then a tractor trailer, 45 feet.
Basically, as far as heights, you still can get the same height. It would not, you couldn't put a bar or something because you can go through with a smaller vehicle, the height would be the same as a tractor trailer, I guess.
So I can tell you from the language in the law, there's no limitation based on height. I do not know if the limitations of the notch would at some point have a height interference, or if it's just not really an issue with the vehicles that are traversing through it. I think you can hear from people who know a lot more about that than I do.
Yes, go ahead. Senator, you had a question.
Oh, sure. Not necessarily a question, but
Okay, go ahead.
okay. So thank you for writing this. I just wanted to
say why it was ultimately introduced. I drafted this because of my time on this committee last year for exactly the reasons that you went through, which is I remember us discussing ways to try to motivate different behavior and to change the calculus for when people are trying to save an hour to go through the notch. I wasn't sure I was going to introduce this. I know there are some issues about enforcement and all those. But when I mentioned this to Senator Westman, who the notch is in his district, he said, absolutely, we should be doing everything we can to inform motorists, regardless of size of vehicle, about the traversability of that. And to that end, I think VTrans has done excellent work on getting every possible sign alongside the roads. I just think we now need to get the signs on the phones. So that's where I wanted to introduce this, to have at least the GPS providers be thinking about what they could do more when the notch is open to adequately warn and of course users on phones which don't know what type of car you're driving.
Have we done this in the past about trying to get to the change?
I don't know. So I'm relatively new around here.
How do we get?
So that's a question that I'm just glad to have started this conversation. I don't know. I don't think this bill is ready for prime time, but I really appreciate us taking up some testimony and hearing from VTrans as to what they could do with the providers.
Because I thought we tried to do the phone thing, but somehow it doesn't get through. I don't know what's the problem, but maybe AMT can help us. Would you like to join the conversation? You can join us.
Yeah, sure.
Just pull the chair.
Okay.
You stay there.
I'm not, Anthea,
I'll sit up. I don't leave the room. Get out of the way.
Yeah, Senator Gentile, you have a question?
it was taken down. I'm not sure if we're taking action on this or further than this, but I just had a grammatical question for Anthea. And in one place we say the employer, I'm doing this off the top of my head, an employer of an operator, and we use the who. In the next section, we talk about an operator of a vehicle that in 3. Shouldn't it be who in both cases? In 3, an operator of a vehicle who violates this subsection, section 3.
That is, I will ask the editors about that. Make sure
Well,
you're-
I just thought it was interesting. In 2, we talk about of an operator who is operating, but in 3, we're using that instead of who. And to me, who is a person, but I'm not sure. Are we going to be taking further in other words, can we as a state, I mean, is this something, do we have any legal authority to impose a civil fine? I'm not sure. I may have missed part of the discussion. So is Senator Chittenden asking that we pursue this bill, or he wanted just discussion of the problem?
Just discussion. There are concerns with interstate commerce and what GPS navigation providers would or wouldn't do. So I have concerns with the bill as it's currently drafted. I think Anthea did a great job, but I wanted to start the conversation on behalf of the senators that expressed interest to understand what we could be doing on these apps.
Okay, well then I won't worry about who versus that, but it was kind of an interesting question. We never understand what the editors do sometimes.
Right? Anything to add to us?
Sure. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. My name is Josh Schultz. I work for the Agency of Transportation. I oversee the Operations and Safety Bureau, which is under I report to Director Ann Gamble in the Highway Division. So first off, thank you. We actually are appreciative of this bill. I think the intent is very noble. And so we're thankful for that. We do have we think this bill has some challenges and some issues, but before I got into that, I was kind of thinking it might be, and Anthea, thank you for that little brief history lesson. That was good. But it occurred to me that it might be helpful if I just kind of quickly briefed you all on kind of some of the advancements we've made, some of what we're implementing currently, what's working, maybe what's not. So first off, last year we had a road safety audit review, which is basically we get a lot of partners from various walks of life, state agencies, A&R being one of them, but also the municipalities, the ski areas, they all come, the public, they're invited. And what we did is we got everybody together on site and we went through, okay, here are the problems, and kind of identified what are we trying to fix here, what are the main issues, and what are some solutions. Out of that, so there was a lot of good discussion, multiple meetings, but out of that, we had some, I'm just going to give you guys some high level solutions that did come from that. One of them was scheduled law enforcement patrols in the area. So last year, we actually, the prior year, we had started with it towards the tail end, but last year we had a full season of law enforcement patrols. And when I say full season, that comes with a caveat. So we had 5 2-week time periods where we had law enforcement that were going out patrolling the notch. So that was 5 days a week for 2 weeks at a time. And what we did is we divided it up for different months. So we basically went from the month of June through October. We did, the law enforcement folks, they did end up stopping some trucks. And on a side note, and this is all sort of anecdotal data, the Agency of Natural Resources, they have folks that are out there very often. And at times they actually were able to flag some trucks that were coming up and just, no enforcement or anything, but saw someone coming and waved them down saying, we don't think you can make it through there. And then they were able to get some trucks turned around as well. So that was one thing. So law enforcement patrols, AOT, Anthea mentioned it. We did a sophisticated terrain assessment. We did, and also as part of that RSAR, road safety audit review, we did do some statutory changes last year. We did change some of the signs, and Senator Chittenden mentioned that. So we revitalized the signs, we updated them, we modified them. The updated ones were done to address the latest bill that was passed last year, the new law. We've also been more proactive working with local news outlets, trying to just educate people, get the word out. We have been working with various GPS companies, and I'll get into that in a second. And we also, and this was probably the most notable, we started a scoping study effort. And the scoping study is just about done. We have some solutions, but the scoping, as you all likely know, is just the very first part of a process where we can implement infrastructure changes out there. So what does all that mean? So last year we got data. We've been looking at the data for a few years now, and we've been taking all the past data we could get. But last year we had 5 trucks stuck. Year before that, we had 5 trucks stuck. Before that, it was notably more. We were going in, the average was around 8, but we would get as high as 11. And so when you look at the averages over a 5-year time period, we are down 41% with our trucks. So we're trending in the right direction. If you're looking at the 10-year, it's down 38%, but we're down a notable amount. So we have and that's part of what we've been trying to get out to the public and other interested parties, is that we are doing things. We are trending in the right direction. Is it perfect? No, but we have more things on the horizon that we're looking to do as well. And on that, and before I just, if you want to talk about the bill itself, just wanted to mention that with that road safety audit review, I mentioned the scoping study. There are some infrastructure proposed changes in that scoping study that came out. And this is highly, a very collaborative process. Public is there, towns, all the neighboring towns are there. And 2 ideas kind of came to the surface. And these are, one of them is a roundabout, actually it'd be 2 roundabouts up towards the top to provide the trucks a place to turn around. And also that's just an area where it's like this kind of moment of pause. I mean, literally when you're coming up on it. So to give the trucks like, okay, nope, this is not going to happen, turn around and go back. That's one, and that'll be on either side of the notch. The other one is the development of, and I'm going to call it a chicane. It's just basically emulating the same geometric constraints that are at the top of the notch in an area where down lower, where a large truck, basically, if you can get through this, you can get through the notch.
I got a question. Which side of the notch has most of the violations? I never figured that out before.
Yeah, that is a good question, and it actually it's kind of half and half. Yeah, and we do have data on that. I'm not sure if I have it right in front of me.
I'm curious, if you had 5 last year, How many for on Vermont side or not Vermont side?
Yeah, the Stowe side versus the Cambridge side. Yeah, I can't,
I never think of the other side. I always think of this side going through, but it's gonna be the other side too, probably.
yeah, and I will say, actually, I failed to do this when I first introduced myself. We do have Todd Sears, Todd and I work together. Todd's on, and as I'm talking, Todd may be able to quickly call up that data and let you guys know if they're what that is.
Okay, good.
It's about 51-49%. So it's about half and half.
It's about half and half.
North-south, yes, sir. Yeah.
More Stowe side, yes.
So you said the truck stockages, and I think that's a word I've heard you all use before, is 558. So it's down 41%. But you also, in the start of your presentation, talked about how you had to wave trucks down, flag them down. Do you have any numbers on how many trucks are actually using this and getting it through? And so like truck usage of the notch?
I don't know of any data on that, on the ones that are, 40 feet or below, or even greater than 40 feet that are making it through. Because we just I don't think we have any certainly any accurate. There might be some anecdotal data, but I don't even know of any anecdotal data out there that would tell us who's making it through and who's not. Well, who's not we have, but yeah, that's a tough one to get, I guess, without actually being out there and kind of monitoring it or putting out some sort of a device that could monitor it, that could measure it on the fly.
Though we will be, to the senator's point, over the next couple of years, hopefully, we're in the midst right now of a procurement of probe data, which is essentially buying data from GPS and satellite companies so that we can identify flow rates through any particular area. And that's something, I think you've been briefed on that. In fact, I think Josh may have introduced that idea to you at the beginning of the session, but we don't have that on board yet. But when we do, that should give us it should give us a more robust way to calculate throughput through the notch, and then all of the other roadways also in Vermont. So I think in terms of data collection and assessment in the out years, we'll be able to get a much greater fidelity on that.
Thank you.
So yeah, and as Senator Chittenden mentioned it, I as the bill, so we, from our perspective, from the agency's perspective, we would like to continue with the measures that we're implementing, that we have success and we have some on the horizon before we go to punitive measures. And as we were reading through this and kind of reviewing this bill, you mentioned something. We do also recognize challenges with enforcement. The other is we are talking to Google. So Google actually reached out to, so we've been working with them, and it's been we haven't had great success, however, with the GPS companies. However, fairly recently, in the last, I'd say 3-4 months, Google actually reached out to the state of Vermont saying, hey, how can we partner, and what are some of our platforms the state could be using that we could kind of work together on? And they actually reached out to the Agency of Digital Services. ADS reached out to us, came across Todd and my desk, and we were like, oh heck yeah, we really would like to engage in this conversation. And we actually sent ADS some of our points of where we feel like this partnership could, one of them being the notch. Where we could have those conversations. And right now that currently resides with ADS. ADS is the one that's taking the leadership on that discussion and then pulling in AOT as appropriate, as needed. But the conversation hasn't started yet. But the reach out, that initial, the initial, I guess, conversation has started, but it hasn't reached us yet. So with all of that, we were kind of concerned that there's a possibility that this bill could in some way, I'll use this word very carefully, like hostility, kind of have this more like hostility at the onset of this conversation with Google. I don't know if it would or not, but that's one of our concerns.
Do we have any flashing lights on either side, like a railroad crossing? Do we have any flashing lights that tries to get their attention?
On the signs, I don't know. Todd, do you know if there's any that have the lights on them?
That are flashing? No.
Okay, so
I would think that'd be helpful because you notice flashing light, but
by no means, I mean to be hostile towards Google. If anything, from my 2 years in my first term and last session, it just didn't seem clear as I raised this with VTrans professionals who to call. And if there was a conversation happening between these navigation providers and VTrans. And I know I was traveling over the summer and there was truck stuckage, and before that I was using my app, and I just thought there was more that we could do. And sometimes it just takes bringing it to their attention. So I'm glad that they have had some outreach in the last 3 or 4 months. And again, I'm not pushing this bill. I just wanted to start this conversation. And Google, my apologies if you took that as hostile.
It hostile probably is the wrong word that I chose. It was just, negative consequences.
And Senator, one thing worth noting, and Josh brought it up, is that there actually is pretty decent progress with freight specific GPS and navigation systems. So those truckers that are using, those freight haulers that are using the Garmin package, the TomTom package, various apps that are out there, Truckway, Smart Truck, there are different things that are out there that are specifically for that community, for freight haulers. They're not being taken up the notch at all because that system works. The issue with your Apple map and your Google map, there you go. And that's what I use too, is that free app is there to service 99.99% of everybody else that can make it through there. And that's kind of the issue. So, however, we are, as Josh mentioned, we are intending to get into more talks with Google on for us in AOT on their geospatial piece. And it is something that is on our agenda to bring up and keep hammering home on, but it's a challenge. It's a challenging thing to have them change the functionality of that free package when its customer set, is 99.9% of the people, are not truckers, are not. So that brings with it kind of a challenge.
I think I've pretty much covered it. Yeah, I think everything else we've had, we've talked about, at least as far as some of our concerns with the bill, but some of the kind of that brief history of time that I just gave you.
So we're making a little progress anyway. We're getting there.
We are. It's I think that it's been perceived by some as like this is we aren't making progress, and there's still another truck. Oh, a truck got stuck, and we're looking at it from the positive side, in that it's not all bad news. There is a good news story here, and that we are trending in the right direction. All the work that we've been putting into it is affecting change. It's not perfect. I will also say that we're dealing with numbers like 5 trucks. So when you're dealing with really low numbers like that, anybody who knows statistics, it doesn't take much to then blow the statistics out of the water. So you have 40% reduction. We have all this, but we don't know. I mean, it just 2 more trucks getting stuck, and then all of a sudden that's a 20-30% raise. Yeah,
one more is big.
Exactly. Yeah. So percentages, it's kind of hard. I don't want to. I'm just kind of laying it out there for you all that we're dealing with a lot of low numbers here. So.
Just one last thing would also inspire this. I remember VTrans presenting last year on the stuckages. I love that word. That there was a larger percentage of out-of-staters that just didn't know the area, and so they're using their phones, I believe, in the presentation. They're not familiar with how untraversable it was, and I just didn't see enough warnings on the phone apps that people are using for especially out-of-state truckers. So that's why I wanted to start this conversation. I'm glad to hear you talking to Google.
Anything else? Anybody? Senator Furchlick, Senator Kitchell, anything else you want to add? No? Okay. All right, anything else? That's it. All right, thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, committee, we have, we're going to go off until 11.